Hello, comrades. In 1981, a copy of this book, Catcher in the Rye, was found in John Hinckley's hotel room just after he tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan. In 1989, Robert John Bardo had this book on him when he murdered the actor Rebecca Schaeffer. And most notably, in 1980, Mark David Chapman had a copy of this book when he assassinated John Lennon and declared that the book itself was his statement and that he wanted to legally change his name to that of the main character. Holden Caulfield. The 1951 three-star classic Catcher in the Rye has always held a mystique of violence and rage for me. I knew that the connection between this book and actual violence was tenuous at best. Nobody decides to murder someone because they read a book, and if they did, the number of violence events linked to this book, would be much larger. But I wanted to see if there was anything darker lurking in this book. So I reread it to try to understand it from an adult perspective, and what I found surprised me. The Catcher in the Rye, a book which narrates 3 days in the life of a depressed teenager, is deeply connected to an important question in modern American politics. What is wrong with young men? What we find in The Catcher in the Rye is a young man, our protagonist and an early anti-hero, Holden Caulfield, who is suffering every problem that we see young men have on a large scale today. He is miserable, often hateful, socially stunted, and he is sexually frustrated. Despite seeming like a reasonably intelligent person, he is failing school, and in fact, he just flunked out of his fourth prep school in a row. And he feels completely alone. He is narrating the story from what is implied to be a medical facility after he was run down, sick, and after he almost caught tuberculosis. He is telling us about just 3 days in his life after flunking every class but English. He describes everyone very negatively, including his 2 roommates. And when he finds out that his roommate went out with a girl he used to know and he was fond of, he gets angry and picks a fight with him and loses. He then takes his money, some stuff, and a train to New York, where his parents live. But unwilling to tell his parents he was kicked out of yet another school, he wanders around New York City, filling his time with various pointless endeavors that he clearly doesn't enjoy, as he describes his distaste for everything and everyone except his younger sister. Now, the fact that young American men have a problem is something agreed upon by both the left and the right, but the exact nature of this problem is not really agreed upon, with conflicting proposed causes and solutions. On the right, the focus tends to be on the idea that modern society is hostile towards certain aspects of masculinity, leading to problems like the male academic achievement gap, high suicide rates among men, and the male loneliness epidemic. On the left, the focus is on the idea that men are discouraged from seeking help, being vulnerable, seeking connection, and engaging in certain helpful activities like therapy or cooking. There is an idea that many men are taught a form of masculinity that is often unhelpful to themselves and society at large, as well as, obviously, if you're a leftist, if you believe that society is fundamentally broken, it does a disservice to everyone. So I decided to take a deeper look into what exactly is wrong with Holden Caulfield, to use them as a lens to understand what is wrong with young men more generally. And I found 3 ways to read this book. One way is to be completely enamored by Holden Caulfield. It's normal to feel lost when you are a teenager, like the world around you is fake and everyone is disingenuous, and that is what he tells you about the world around him. People, especially when they read the book as teenagers, often feel that Holden is right to varying degrees about this assessment of the world. For this reason, for many people, Holden is emblematic of what it means to be a teenager, which was a relatively new concept when the book was published. And honestly, it's a concept that was likely shaped heavily, at least in the US, by this book. When you're a teenager, it's easy to think that your classmates are assholes, your teachers are bad, what you were forced to learn in school is mostly pointless, and that the adults in your life, which in the case of Holden were a bunch of rich business people, are fake. It's easy to look at the adult world around you and not want to be a part of it. Holden is teenage rebellion against a corrupt world when you are mature enough to see the corruption of the world, but not yet so adult as to fall into the corruption yourself. If you read the book this way, the answer to the question, what is wrong with Holden Caulfield, and by extension young men, is nothing. There's nothing wrong with them. They are reacting negatively to a broken society, which is an appropriate reaction given the circumstances. While I was never too fond of Holden personally, I do think the broader idea that young men are reacting negatively to a broken world does have some merit. I do not think that young men are falling behind in school because there's anything fundamentally broken about them, but rather, clearly they are not being served by the current educational system. And frankly, while this may be obvious with men, I do not think the failure of the educational system is exclusive to us. That is, I think it might do a greater disservice to men statistically, and we see this in our academic performance, but I do not think it is the ideal system for any group of people at large. The second way you can read The Catcher in the Rye is often the reaction of those who used to read it the first way. Basically, it's when you think that Holden Caulfield is a whiny rich kid. He is insufferable and entitled. He refuses to take the blame for anything, despite being the cause of every one of his own problems. He is incapable of joy. There's a moment when his younger sister, who seems honestly like a much kinder and more insightful character, asks him to name one thing that he does like. And it is a legit struggle for him to come up with a single thing he actually likes. As an aside, I would have appreciated a book from the perspective of his sister. I think that would be interesting. Reading the book this way is honestly an awful experience. If you ever meet anyone who really hates Catcher in the Rye, it's probably because this is how they read it. The book really isn't very plot heavy, and it is written in such a distinct voice and perspective that every single sentence in this book oozes with the style of this kid who is becoming increasingly annoying. Honestly, the best part about reading the book this way is that you know that Holden is such a damn hypocrite that he would hate himself even more than you do if he ever had to interact with some kind of clone of himself, or an exact copy, or anyone sufficiently similar to him. And while this was my initial reading, and one I still gravitate to on an emotional level, applied more broadly, I can see that it is the reading I most disagree with on principle. If we used this reading as a lens to examine the problems of the young American man, it would show us that some of them are just whiny brats who need to man up and do better. And while that might be a message that's helpful for some young men with certain problems in certain environments, it's reasonable to conclude that there is an environmental cause to the problems of young men, and not that a large percentage of them happen to have weak souls and they just need to man up. One of the common refrains of people who have read the book this way, that Holden is just a whiny brat who needs to get over himself, is that he's not that deep. But after reading the book a second time, I think that refrain misses something about the book itself. Third way I have found of reading this book: the depth of Holden Caulfield as a character isn't in his ability to recognize a corrupt and false world around him. It's in the pain and experience that have led him to feel this way in the first place. Before his roommate goes out on a date with Holden's friend, he asks Holden to do a writing assignment for him because despite his academic failings, Holden is a good writer. So Holden writes a deeply heartfelt piece about his younger brother who died just 3 years earlier. And Holden, as a young teenager, has not been given tools to handle the death of his brother. He is heartbroken over it. So when his roommate reads it, and he doesn't like it, Holden takes it and rips it up. Holden doesn't feel like he has the space to talk about what happened and process his feelings. He cannot tell his roommate that it was real. And maybe a little bit later on, when he starts a fight with his roommate, it's not actually about the girl. Maybe it's about the feelings he was writing about his brother and being told that it doesn't fit a requirement, while he feels like he is incapable of expressing himself. And there is a motif of Holden getting upset over arbitrary rules and expectations and people refusing to have a genuine, heartfelt, deep conversation. I think that this repeated motif of him getting upset over his limitation, the limitations of expression, are tied to his inability to express all of his feelings about his brother, or even what happened more broadly, to the people who are the closest thing he has to real friends. Outwardly, he only seems to ever really express anger or violence to his brother's death, at least when he's not talking to his younger sister. And many men have trouble expressing sadness about serious issues. And I think it is interesting that the only people Holden seems to genuinely like for a consistent amount of time are children. And it's clear that he yearns. He yearns for his own childhood before his brother's death. Now, I very fortunately did not lose any of my siblings when I was a child, but it's clear that he looks up to his late brother and admires him deeply and feels guilty for having lived. He feels like his brother was a better person who deserved life more, and I think he feels guilty that he is growing to be an adult while his younger brother is eternally a child. So he romanticizes childhood in what honestly feels like a very natural and human like reaction to the situation. And when his younger sister is trying to help him figure out his life, she asks him what he wants to do with it. He starts talking about how he imagines a big field of rye with no adults and a bunch of children playing in the field near a cliff, and he stands at the edge and catches them if they get too close to falling. Catcher in the Rye. A lot of people seem to interpret this as him wanting to preserve their innocence forever so that they never grow old, they never fall into adulthood, like Peter Pan or something. But I think of it more literally, honestly. He wishes to save children the way his brother was not saved, and as we will see, the way he was not saved. Which brings us to one of the most revealing parts of the book. It's a single line I think many people overlook towards the end of it. When he's looking for a place to stay for just a couple of nights before he can return home to his parents, he calls up a former teacher and he crashes on the teacher's couch. And he wakes up suddenly to find his teacher staring at him, patting his head. The teacher tries to explain that he was just admiring, but Holden doesn't let him explain. Holden makes up an excuse and he leaves as quickly as possible, and he outright plans to run away in response to this. So honestly, I don't know if we were supposed to read the teacher as making a sexual advance on Holden, which is what Holden interpreted it as. But Holden says that things like this have happened to him 20 times since he was a kid, which clearly suggests that Holden has a history of being abused that he is not ready to talk about openly. He only, in this entire book, gives us this one line to tell us such a big thing, but he doesn't really say anything about it. And he does have an experience that I think if Holden hadn't had a history of abuse would seem over the top. He has a place to stay. He's crashing on a couch, and a teacher like maybe touches his head while he's sleeping, and he jumps immediately, not just to I have to go back to my parents, so I need another place to stay, but I have to get out of New York City. He has to run away, and that is how he feels, which for me was very indicative of a history of abuse. And I think this reframes the romanticization of children, or at least of the childhood innocence that children have. It's clear that he views adolescence and sexual experience as violent, and he is upset that children experience adolescence because of this view that it is a violent thing to experience. I think this is also the key to understanding a part of his sexual frustration. He seems to view sex negatively. He says that women get dumber when you make out with them, that sex is crummy, and he views it as inherently violent or coercive. Even when his younger sister Phoebe tells him that there's a boy that pushed her, he says that the boy probably likes her. And I know this is a trope, but I think it feeds into the narrative in Holden's mind that intimacy is violent. I think Holden has a desire that many men have that I think they don't really talk about. He only wants to have sex with a woman he has an emotional connection to. And I think a lot of men feel the connection to pursue sex outside of an emotional connection just because of how it's perceived culturally. Men are supposed to want sex whether it's an emotional connection or not. Otherwise, you're just not a real man. But Holden, he can't bring himself to have sex with a woman he actually likes because he views it as violent and sinful. There's a part where he's in a cheap hotel and he's looking into other rooms and he sees this couple squirting water out of their mouths onto each other. And he says, quote, "It stinks. If you analyze it, I think if you don't really like a girl, you shouldn't horse around with her at all. And if you do like her, then you're supposed to like her face. And if you like her face, you ought to be careful about doing crummy stuff to it, like squirting water all over it. It's really too bad that so much crummy stuff is a lot of fun sometimes." So he's looking at these two people, and they're engaging in some kind of play that he views as crummy, as perverted, as wrong. And he wants to do that, but he can't do that with someone he likes. And so he has this intense inner conflict surrounding these emotions. And even without his history of abuse, I think because of the broader cultural context in which Holden lives, in which what he has learned from those around him, from media, from talking to friends, is this impression that Holden has that women are supposed to say no and that men are supposed to ignore that no. He says, quote, "The thing is, most of the time when you're coming pretty close to doing it with a girl, she keeps telling you to stop. The trouble with me is, I stop. Most guys don't. I can't help it. You never can tell whether they really want you to stop or whether they're just scared as hell or whether they're just telling you to stop so that if you go through with it, the blame will be on you, not them." And so when he does stop, when he does the right thing, he views himself as doing the wrong thing. Like it's his failure as a man to respect that no, to respect women. And this is in contrast to his roommate, who Holden describes as deceiving a woman in the back of a car and going on even when she says no. Holden seems aware enough to know that what his roommate does is wrong, but not aware enough to be okay being better than his roommate and respecting women in this way and respecting their basic consent. And this is the same roommate that went out with Jane, the girl from before, and Holden got into a fight with him. But much later in the book, Holden describes a time when he was playing checkers with Jane, and her alcoholic stepfather came in and asked where he could find cigarettes. But Jane, this girl who he used to like, doesn't respond. She doesn't even look at him until he goes away. And then she sheds a tear on the checkerboard. Holden then kissed her. And honestly, I've been wondering about that kiss. If it was welcome or if he was just assaulting her, and why did he feel the need to kiss her at that moment? And maybe it's what he thought would make her feel better. But afterwards they go to the movies together. Holden asks Jane if her stepfather ever made a move on her. And I think Holden might have seen something in Jane that he saw in himself. And I think that's why he got so angry when his roommate, who, he knows to not take no as an answer, went on a date with this woman, with this person he felt such a deep connection towards. But even still, I think Holden has trouble fully being vulnerable with us, with expressing this connection he feels towards her, and he just fixates on checkers. He talks about how she kept all of her kings on the back rank, and this seemed cute to him. And honestly, I think this is him looking for the innocence in her, because there is something innocent about it. Obviously, if you want to win at checkers, you don't want to keep your kings on the back rank. But she just likes how it looks, and she doesn't care about winning. She's not so competitive, and so maybe there's something innocent about that to him, and that is the thing he's trying to express when he talks about her. There's a scene where he hires a prostitute, but ends up only wanting to talk, and the prostitute is confused by this. And as an aside, I think that this is the most unrealistic part of the story. I have to imagine that men only wanting to talk would probably be a fairly regular experience for a lot of prostitutes. But Holden doesn't actually want sex, or at least it's clearly not the most important thing for him. Holden wants human connection, and he can't say that, and he can't seek it. There's another really telling scene where he's going out with this other girl, Sally, and Holden likes people when he's not around them. He misses people. He has nostalgia for people, but when he's actually with them, he never seems to really like them. Because when he actually likes people, they get on his nerves. He's getting annoyed by Sally, and he asks her if she ever gets fed up with school and everything. And she says that it's a bore. And that it's not quite enough for him. And so he asks Sally if Sally hates it. But she doesn't hate it. She just thinks it's a bore. But Holden hates it. He hates school. He hates New York. He hates himself. And he starts telling her about how he can't stand everything until he doesn't even realize that he's shouting. And she has to tell him to be more quiet. I could feel that Holden was angry and hateful. And what he wanted most in the world, at least in that moment, was someone who shared his hate. Who could understand how he felt. Holden calls everyone else a phony, but he calls himself an exhibitionist when he starts dancing in front of other people. The idea that others are a phony is an emotional shield for Holden. He says that when you are too good at something, it's bad, talking about a piano player. Holden says, quote, "He's so good, he's almost corny. In fact, I don't exactly know what I mean by that, but I mean it. I certainly like to hear him play, but sometimes you feel like turning his goddamn piano over. I think it's because sometimes when he plays, he sounds like the kind of guy that won't talk to you unless you're a big shot." This gives Holden an excuse not to try, because if you try to be good at something, or you know you are good at something, then you are a phony. If you know you are bad at something, but still do it in front of others, then you are corny too. So Holden never really tries at anything other than writing and English class. The idea of the phony also serves as an emotional shield from the idea that other people might just be happier than him. It's part of why he gets angry when Sally isn't hateful, because he can't imagine not hating life. Not feeling that kind of pain he has in him. And honestly, it reminds me of when Clavicular left that Channel 5 interview because the interviewer said that he felt 100% comfortable with his appearance.
When you wake up every single morning and you take a look in the mirror, you're 100% satisfied with every single thing. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, more or less.
I guess that's just, if you want to be completely disingenuous, that's fine with me. I guess there's just no point to continue.
And people who don't like this book often focus on the lack of a plot. It's just this kid bar hopping around New York for 3 days complaining about everything. Nothing happens, and he doesn't develop as a character. Whereas some people who really love this book, I think oversell the plot. They make it seem like he undergoes a massive character change and development. I saw one person point to a scene towards the end where he's watching Phoebe riding the carousel, and he's worried that she's going to fall off to trying to grab the gold ring. Apparently on a lot of carousels there are rings you can try and grab, and if you grab the gold ring you get a prize. This was not a thing on carousels when I was a kid. At least not the ones I was around. And so Holden is worried that his sister will fall, but says you can't say anything to children, you just have to let them reach for the ring. So the person who pointed towards the scene took it as a sign that Holden Caulfield was ready to let go of Phoebe, and he had outgrown his unhealthy romanticization of childhood. But I don't think that's well supported by the broader context of the text. The only reason that she's on the carousel in the first place is because he told her to get on. She thought she was too old for it, too big for it, and he said that she wasn't, and he bought her a ticket, and he's happy watching her ride, even with the risk of her falling. And so he's happy seeing her as a child playing. He's not happy to watch her fall, and he's not happy to watch her not be a child, to watch her be more grown up. And I think falling is separate from becoming an adult. Holden Caulfield is falling. As his teacher, the same one whose couch he was going to crash on, points out, and I quote, "This fall I think you're riding for. It's a special kind of fall, a horrible kind. The man falling isn't permitted to feel or hear himself hit bottom. He just keeps falling and falling. The whole arrangement's designed for men who, at some time or other in their lives, were looking for something their own environment couldn't supply them with. Or they thought their own environment couldn't supply them with. So they gave up looking. They gave it up before they ever really even got started." Falling is a motif in the story, and there is another character who falls. In one of the other schools Holden went to, there was another kid who had borrowed Holden's sweater. And Holden says that they weren't that close, and it's hard to tell because Holden is really kind of an unreliable narrator, especially with things that are important to him. But that kid was bullied. Holden says he won't tell us what they did to the boy because it was too repulsive. And to escape his torture, while they were bullying him in a bathroom, he jumped out the window. And honestly, I don't know if that boy heard the sound when he hit the ground, but he didn't hear anything after that ever again. That boy died when he hit the ground. And Holden saw him, blood and teeth everywhere, with that body left there, still wearing Holden's sweater. And I think that's the kind of fall Holden was on. I think that's where he was heading. In the very last chapter, Holden tells us that at the place where he's at, he talks to psychoanalysts. And in the beginning, he said he was sick, run down, and how he almost got tuberculosis. And that's why he was in the hospital. But I don't know if you talk to psychoanalysts because of TB, I think he was in a mental institution. So putting everything together, why is he telling us about these 3 days from his life, specifically from a mental institution? It's not because of what happened during those 3 days per se. It's because of the event that happened later, that those 3 days led up to. And it seems like Holden, who is miserable and prone to looking for a way out and is pessimistic about the idea of adulthood, tried to take his own life. He even expresses his own desire to do so earlier in the novel. He says, quote, I felt like jumping out the window. I probably would have done it too if I'd been sure somebody'd cover me up as soon as I landed. I didn't want a bunch of stupid rubbernecks looking at me when I was all gory. So he wants to do it, but he doesn't want to be like his friend whose memory is scarred into his own mind. And personally, I like to think that he found a way that he thought would be less traumatic for those around him. The plot in this book is not what happens in the events of the book. The events of this book are the immediate context for the major plot point of his life. They don't contain it itself. And it has hints and sprinkles of broader context throughout, written left by a character who is unwilling or incapable of addressing his largest emotional issues. And I know a lot of people take the ending of this book as happy. They think that he's reached some breakthrough with his sister or something, or it's positive that he sought help. But I can't feel that way about this ending. It's clear that after the final scene with Phoebe, he is sent to a mental institution, and I do not think he sought help, nor do I think that they sent him because he seemed a bit depressed. I think, even if I am wrong and he did not try to take his life, that at the very least he suffered a nervous breakdown of some kind that was large enough for it to seem imperative to send him away to an institution. I found this reading, the third way of reading this book, the hardest reading to come to, but also the most worthwhile. Zooming out, asking myself what it means as a lens for understanding the problems of young men, I think it's honestly the most obvious lens to understand the societal issues that young men face. Young men are not served well by a society that will not hear their pain and discourage them from seeking help. And this particularly affects those men who have been hurt the most. It is a confounding factor. Men are not a monolith, so some men might not be affected by it much, but men who are traumatized and then are not given the tools to deal with that trauma suffer. This book, for me, depicts a society where individual trauma and experience are made even worse by broader societal attitudes and circumstances that the character must carry with him. As for the broader tone of the novel, if I think that at the end, when he's in the institution, if I think things are better for Holden, I don't know. I think it's a positive that he is telling us about his experiences, but I can't say with certainty that he has been able to address his problems. When the psychoanalyst asks him if he's going to apply himself when he gets back to school in the fall, he says it's a stupid question. He thinks he will. He thinks he will apply himself more, but he doesn't know. Which I think is one of the most honest things Holden says in the entire book. Holden's mental health struggles will be an ongoing issue and could be a lifelong problem with him. In many ways, the book reminds me of The Bell Jar. Both books feel like the author is writing a rather autobiographical novel about their experiences with trauma and mental health issues. The Bell Jar seems more willing to address these issues directly than The Catcher in the Rye is, and it seems to be far more based around the experiences of its author. The Bell Jar felt less fictional and not just like he was capturing the inner feeling, but they both left me with the feeling that the struggles within the books were going to be ongoing issues for the main characters, who from a certain perspective feel indistinguishable from the authors. Tragically, the author of The Bell Jar did not survive her mental health problems, but J.D. Salinger lived a long life, so maybe there is hope that Holden managed to make it through, and that he found some kind of peace in life. By the way, I'll leave the link to my video on The Bell Jar below, because I do think it is the best video I've made on this channel. But the ending of The Catcher in the Rye doesn't feel altogether positive to me, and I'm not sure if Holden develops. It feels more to me like throughout the book he is simply falling further and further down into a darker and darker place. The more time I spend thinking about this book, the more I've begun to fixate on the title, The Catcher in the Rye, the thing Holden wanted to be, catching falling children, the thing that Holden needed but did not have, and I have been wondering if such a thing exists. If I mean, if we interpret it as something that literally stops children from growing up, no, it doesn't exist. It obviously cannot exist with modern technology, at least. But I think if we think of it as something that stops children from being traumatized, from stopping them from falling in the way I think Holden is falling, then I think it might exist in some form. J.D. Salinger, the author of The Catcher in the Rye, was most certainly traumatized. He was a soldier in the Second World War. He bore witness to many horrendous events, like the landing of Normandy, which he was a part of. And at one point, he remarked that he never got the smell of burning flesh out of his nose. He wrote on themes of depression, anger, and suicide, and after reading Catcher in the Rye and knowing that he identified so strongly with Holden, he once went so far as to say he wanted to be the actor who portrayed him in a play. Knowing all of that and reading the book, I have to believe that J.D. Salinger had traumas even before being a World War II veteran, although I'm not sure to what extent. There are obviously norms and customs to try and prevent children and adults like Holden Caulfield, like J.D. Salinger, from experiencing severe trauma, although they are often imperfect. These can serve as a kind of catcher in the rye. Holden seems to have a fondness for mothers, for example, so maybe he could imagine a mother taking care of her child, protecting her child from the elements, giving them a safe place, and maybe that was a kind of catcher in the rye. However, if the catcher in the rye is really there so that kids do not jump, that they might not try to take their life, I think that anything might serve as a catcher in the rye. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a friend where I said my favorite definition of the meaning of life was Camus. Whatever stops you from killing yourself is the meaning of your life. And she asked me if that meant that when she was trying to kill herself and her mother was physically preventing it, if that was the meaning of her life. And I thought about it, and I think it might be. Maybe in that instance, you could say that her mother's love was the meaning of her life, of my friend's life. Or maybe even that my friend's own physical weakness and her mother's physical strength were the meaning of her life. She was alive because her mother had the power to physically stop her from killing herself. I must admit that for Holden, I don't know what could have been the catcher in the rye for him. Something that would have saved his brother, something that would have stopped his friend from being bullied and jumping out a window, something that would have stopped the trauma he experienced. I wonder if for some people there is nothing. I wonder if God chose to make certain people with a neurology of suffering that makes life unbearable, regardless of their external circumstances. And now I have to wonder if this was ever the meaning of someone's life. This book, did anyone ever want to get the hell out of Dodge? And if they read this book and they stopped because someone shared their pain, Holden himself says that when he reads a really terrific book, he wishes he could call up the author as a friend. So I wonder if this book saved anyone's life. And I don't know what makes people take their life, and I know what makes them not take their life even less. But maybe Holden Caulfield, just knowing that someone else out there at some point had felt the same thing that they did, was powerful enough for someone to decide to keep on living. And honestly, I hope that's the case. I hope that this book has helped people and comforted them in their time of deepest sorrow. And I think for some people have such a relationship to this book that it might have done that. But of course, we know, because it doesn't make the news when someone doesn't take their life. We know of at least one person who identified with this book and took the wrong message and saw it as an inspiration for violence. Holden, being a hypocrite, calls himself a pacifist and still starts fights. But I think Holden Caulfield would be disgusted by anyone who did something so horrendous. He's a lost boy who does bad things, but he still worries about the ducks in the pond in Central Park, and he wants someone to worry about him the same way. But still reflecting on The Catcher in the Rye has made me reflect on what I'm doing here, making YouTube videos. I suppose the point of all art, and I guess this counts as art, is for the artist to take something within their soul and try to replicate it externally as art, so that it will spread to more people with the hope that it will resonate with other people and that part of their soul will spread further, whether that part of the soul is an ideology, an idea, or even just one particular emotion or feeling. I think the artist must do it to express themselves, but put it into the world, like J.D. Salinger did, and I guess like I am doing. I think the artist has to have the hope that the world will be a better place with that little splint of their soul replicated in other people. And for this reason, I think what I'm doing here is kind of egotistical. Sitting down, writing something out, standing in my case, really struggling to make sure that what I'm doing is representative of a part of my soul, and that I'm really kind of hoping it will spread out into the world and make the world a better place, even if for a couple of people. And obviously, for J.D. Salinger, the stakes are much higher. He has to wonder if John Lennon died as a consequence of what he put out into the world, and he also has to wonder if there was anyone in a really dark place who found comfort in The Catcher in the Rye and decided not to make a decision that they couldn't take back afterwards. But I think even for the amateur artists and creators like me, it matters. Like right now, my most successful video has a few less than 1,000 views. I think it'll probably have a thousand views by the time I publish this. And that video is just me responding to a right-wing interpretation of Shrek. And honestly, I kind of feel bad about it for a few different reasons. One, it's a very negative video, and I don't like being too negative on my channel. I could have just made a video talking about why Holden Caulfield is a terrible human being, and I could have brought up every example of everything bad he ever did, and all of his contradictions and hypocrisy and bad opinions, and it probably would have had a better audience than the 20 or so people who watch this video now. But it seems cheap and trivial to do so. I prefer trying to see the beauty in things and improving my opinion of a piece of art, and ideally the opinion of my audience as well. When I read a book like this to make a video about it, I want to like the book better after I make the video, after I read it. But my other video about Shrek is just boring. Someone came up with a creative, albeit right-wing interpretation of a work, and I'm standing in that video just saying it's wrong because it's not well supported by the text. But I don't give my own creative interpretation. I just let it sit there, offering kind of the most basic interpretation of the original work of Shrek. And I do have to wonder what that says about my soul, that it's a part of my soul that I decided to put out there. And I look at the comment section in the trivial arguments that dwell there, and I have to ask myself if by being a hobbyist YouTuber, am I just kind of a amateur merchant of rage? I don't feel like I'm the Catcher in the Rye catching people in their darkest moments. And I can see in this book, in The Catcher in the Rye, that art is powerful. Even the art that a lot of people don't enjoy. A lot of people hate this book. And I have to ask myself if I'm squandering, or even worse, misusing my power to spread things into the world. And Holden really hates the movie. See, and at first I thought it was because J.D. Salinger hated the movies because they tried to make a movie adaptation of one of his stories and it didn't go well. But J.D. Salinger actually really liked movies, at least according to the 5 seconds of research I did about him before I made this video. So I think I undersold the man. I undersold J.D. Salinger as an artist. There has to be a reason that Holden hates the movies. And I wonder what Holden would be like in a modern world. I wonder what Holden Caulfield would think of YouTube, for example. And I think he would hate what it has become. He describes his brother, who works as a writer in Hollywood, as a prostitute for Hollywood. He thinks his brother gave up writing authentic stories to write phony movie stories and make a lot of money. So I guess there's something inspirational to learn from this book here about art. Something to learn about trying to share a part of my soul with the world, which is to strive for authenticity. Like, I might be an amateur merchant of rage, or any other emotion for that matter, but I think rage does the best in the algorithm, if I'm honest. But I think as long as I maintain authentic emotions, if I make a video, like whether it be an angry video or a sad video or a happy video or a video of any kind, may it be so for a reason. May it be angry for a reason. May it be sad for a reason. Like, maybe that's what separates a good storyteller from a bad one, for Holden at least. And maybe there is some truth in that. But we have the internet now, and anyone with an interest can form a community, even if that interest is anger, even if it's hate. And I think there are a lot of young men like Holden who form communities around how they hate people. And instead of working as a catcher in the rye for them, it fosters in it until they hate more and more, and they dwell on their insecurities and disdain for the world, which is ruining their lives and other people's lives. I wonder if Holden, someone who desired sex but couldn't quite make it happen, would identify with the self-proclaimed incel communities that preach that women will only ever be with a small percentage of men and that they are ultimately selfish. I wonder if he would grow up, even more bitter. I wonder, would a Holden Caulfield of today idealize Elliot Rogers? And I wonder what he would think about things like looks maxing. After spending so much time with Holden, after growing attached to him, despite his flaws and the things that annoy me about him. Even though it might be like silly to hope in the moral character of a fictional character, I do hope that he would reject these communities, that he wouldn't fall into misogynistic communities that say that women are the cause of his problems, and that if he just smashes his face with a hammer enough or takes enough steroids or does meth to lose weight, that he will be appealing to people and he won't be alone and he'll be happy and all of his problems will just go away. Unfortunately, just like Holden doesn't know if he will be able to apply himself in the fall, I do not know if Holden would fall into communities based in hate, although I must admit that I am not optimistic at the moment. And I also have to wonder how he would be perceived in our world. The kid who dislikes many things, the kid with poor social skills, executive function, and emotional control, who shouts without realizing it and is having trouble talking to people outside of his area of interest. And I'm led to believe, and I can't believe I haven't heard anyone else say this, but Holden Caulfield is autistic coded. And maybe in this way his life could be better now if he found trouble connecting with other people, but if he had words to describe it, like autism or any other concept that might be popular now that was not known at the time, maybe if he could go to grief counseling and therapy for his trauma, he would be better. Maybe if he had the words for why he couldn't connect with others, things would be easier for him. Or maybe he would be able to simply be able to connect positively to other people like him, or with the same understanding of the world as him. Maybe he would be a better person now. Like, I like to think that at the very least, J.D. Salinger would be better off if he were born today, if for no other reason that he would not have had to face the horrors of World War II. I like to think that his wars on a global scale are becoming less common, although there's been a slight reverse in that trend recently, recent years. I like to think that we are moving in a better, towards a better, more peaceful world that doesn't traumatize young children, 18-year-olds as much. And we talk about the problems that young men face now, and I think there's a hidden lie there. We're transmitting the idea that men before were better off, and while many men do seem to think that, I don't think that going off to die in World War II actually made any men better. There's a myth that many of the problems of the present are new. Obviously before there was no neurodivergency, there wasn't so much depression, mental health wasn't important. People just manned up and got along and never talked about any of that stuff. But J.D. Salinger did. He had problems and he talked about that stuff, and he talked about in this book, and he became one of the most successful authors who ever lived because he talked about those problems, because he talked about trauma and how it sucked being a teenager and a suicide. The themes and problems of The Catcher in the Rye are relevant, and more importantly, they were relevant at the time, and they've always been relevant, and unfortunately, they likely always will be. When we look at the Holden Caulfields of today, the young men with problems, I do not think we can simply say that they must man up, get over it, or return to traditional values. J.D. Salinger grew up in a world of traditional values, and he had these problems, and these problems were so relatable that they made him a best-selling author. One of the best-selling authors of all time. But like the Holden of the past, I do not know what we can do for the Holdens of the present. I think many of them are falling one way or another, but I do not know how we can be their catcher in the rye. But I do think this book can help us try to understand them. It is easy to read this book and think it's just a whiny rich kid with no real problems besides himself, but I think it's better to try to dig deep and understand the character. Likewise, many of the young men who seem to form communities of hate also exist within a context where for them it makes sense to be where they are. It makes sense for them to form those communities to them. It doesn't mean we must think that they can do no wrong, and it doesn't mean we must like all of them. But just like we do not have to like this book, but I think it's possible to understand them better. You can hate this book, you can hate certain communities, but it's good to try to understand them. And I hated this book when I first read it, and that's okay. There are people who love this book in a way I never could, and now I feel different. I think I didn't always enjoy the experience of reading this book, of spending time with this character, with spending time with Holden, but I can't. But I can appreciate the artistry behind it, and I do feel drawn to reading some of J.D. Salinger's other works. So just to see what they are, how they relate to this one, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend this book to anyone who has never read it before. Maybe you just wouldn't have a good time reading it, but you may love it. You may be one of those people who just falls in love with it. But oddly enough, this sticks out for me. If you read this book a long time ago and you hated it, I would recommend that you give it a reread to try to find something better in it than the first time you read it. I found the second reading to be well worth it. Far more worth it for me than the first reading. Finally, there were 7 words I had to look up or found a little bit interesting while reading this book. First up, we have falsies, which is like padding you put in your breasts for like women to put in their breasts to make their breasts look better. I guess men can do it too. More power to you. Actually, I tried to ask like Gemini or ChatGPT something like that, what it meant, and it told me there were eyelash extensions, and I'm like, I don't know if that makes sense, and I found a real source that gave actual information, and it told me that they were padded breasts, and then that made sense in context. So yeah, don't trust AIs. I don't know why I even bothered to ask it. Next up, we have the grip. This means the cold or the flu. And if you speak French or Spanish and you know la grippe or la grippe, this is already a word you're familiar with. It just fell out of popularity in English for some reason. We have goodbye. Yeah, it just means goodbye, but I thought it was spelt funny with this little dash in the middle. Like it was goodbye something, he was good by my neighbor or something like that. Next, we have chiffonier, which is similar to a sideboard. It's a type of furniture. This type of furniture with the picture up here. We have fantastic, which I knew this was a thing. I didn't realize how recent it was. It's not meant, it didn't mean really good. It meant unrealistic in the context of this book. And I always thought that was like a much older use. I thought that was like 1800s and not like, mid 1900s. Malted, this is apparently a kind of milkshake. Who knew? Flit, this is apparently an old-timey word used to describe gay people. Given the time period it was used in, it probably was derogatory. I don't know how people feel about it now, if anyone does feel any kind of a way. So I don't know. If you're not gay, be careful. If you are gay, hey, reclaim the word, I guess. I don't know, your choice. Finally we have our last word, moccasins, which is originally a Native American shoe, but has been co-opted to describe this other kind of shoe. I knew it was always a kind of shoe, I just didn't really know what kind of shoe or the history behind it. I thought that was kind of interesting. If you enjoyed this video, I would highly encourage you to click over here to watch my video about my struggles with the fact that Neil Gaiman, a certified monster, wrote one of my favorite books, and how that information changed my perception of the work. It only has a few views, but I think it deserves more views, so please click on it. Give me your pity clicks. But don't forget to drop me a like before you go. And good night, good day, and good. I forgot to buy a potato, so have a good magnesium supplement.